Hey everyone, this is a new series that I want to do, just talking about whatever thoughts I have about any video games I played in a week. The first few episodes will just be me talking about a lot of my vague thoughts on games I've gotten to play over the past 4 years, but once I start making these weekly, they'll probably be far shorter, depending on what I did in a week. There's also going to be a section at the end of every episode where I talk about a gaming topic, so if there's anything you want to hear my thoughts on, or any questions you have for me about video games, then comment them and I'll probably address them in a future episode. This series will feature minimal editing, typically just non-specific footage from whatever game I'm talking about, and I'm still thinking about whether or not I want to do music in the background, or sound effects from the game, just going. But for now, just to give you all a vibe of what the series is going to be like, let's catch up on a lot of the games that I've missed out on. So, let's start off easy with one of the earlier ones that I started off with, Rhythm Heaven. So I started playing Rhythm Heaven Fever a while back through Dolphin on my shitty ass laptop. I mean, I guess it wasn't that shitty, but it's definitely shitty now. And I made, you might remember, my Rhythm Heaven Fever review, and it's very outdated. There are a lot of things I still agree with from that video, like exhibition match fucking sucking and being the worst rhythm game in the game. But a lot of the things I actually said about some of the games are things that I either want to expand on or just retract completely. Like, I think I said that Remix 10 was only an A because it was just too hard. And looking back on it, not only was that kind of a stupid reason to put Remix 10 down, but it's also probably my fault anyway, because like I said, I was emulating the game, and just in case you don't know, when you emulate rhythm games, there's always going to be an inherent bit of input lag that's just not going to go through properly. So you're playing basically every emulated rhythm game at a disadvantage, and I somehow got through 99% of Rhythm Heaven Fever without that being an issue, but I guess I got to the end and, well, no, there were definitely a few throughout that fucked me up, like a Figure Fighter. I always thought there was just something wrong with the game, but it might have just been because I was emulating it, and it was harder to get used to than others. And Donk Donk, though that game is also just weird. So, after I played Fever, then I went back and played the DS Rhythm Heaven, just titled Rhythm Heaven, but not to be confused with Rhythm Heaven on the Game Boy Advance, which I'll just call Rhythm Tengoku for ease of access. Though I'll probably end up calling the DS one Rhythm Heaven DS anyway. You'll always know what I'm talking about, probably. But yeah, then I homebrewed my 2DS, and then downloaded Rhythm Heaven to that, so I could, actually play with the touchscreen controls and have them work. Because that's one where emulating it, the problem isn't even with the rhythm games, it's that the stylus needs flicking, which you can't really emulate with a mouse, at least not in the same way that the DS takes flick inputs. It's a whole thing. But yeah, I ended up emulating it, and there were definitely highs from DS, like the vegetable one, the one where you're stomping and picking up the vegetables. Lockstep's a good one, because they brought that one back in Megamix, which we'll get to. So yeah, there's definitely highs in DS, but DS also had way lower lows, and was brought down by the fact they had to control it with a touchscreen. Because even simple games, like the one where you're taking a picture of the race car or whatever, are made just less fun to engage with, but the fact that I have to sit there hover-handing my stylus the entire time. And then there's games like the Ghost Guitar one, where you have to flick for every guitar strum, and when they, increase the speed, the tempo by 5 times, it gets really annoying to have to make every single one of those a swipe and not just a flick. Now granted, it worked most of the time, but the fact that you even had to swipe at all instead of just a tap was part of what made that minigame a little bit annoying, because you have to flick and then come back down from the flick before the next flick starts. Which, again, is possible, but not very fun. And there's a lot of instances where the game made you flick that weren't fun, and There are times where it made you tap that I think would have just worked better as a button. There are very few that I think were actually helped by being on the DS with this unique control style. Mostly the vegetable one that I brought up earlier. It is very satisfying to go from taps to a downswing upswing when you're, getting the vegetables up in your bag. So it's not all bad. But if Rhythm Heaven Fever is an 8, then DS is a very clear 7. Not a huge downgrade from Fever, but it's noticeable enough for me to be able to definitively say, yeah, DS is a 7, Fever's an 8. They are very clearly different things. And then the next one that I played was Megamix, because again, still had the homebrewed 2DS, and so I just downloaded Megamix to it. And Megamix is easily the best Rhythm Heaven game. Like, if the clear division between DS and Fever was that Fever was an 8, DS was a 7, then Megamix is clearly a 9. And it would be a 10, but there's a lot of small things that drag the game down. Like, in terms of all the good things, there's definitely a lot more to play for between the skill stars and the slightly higher barrier to entry, let's say, for getting an okay or a superb score. And even just things as simple as, like, the indicator showing how close you were to being on the beat. It's very nice for just being able to practice these games and play them over and over again, which I feel like is what was intended for really any Rhythm game, but for Rhythm Heaven particularly, with the songs being so short and so simple, it feels like they were very much made for perfection. You go back to them over and over again to get those perfect scores, to get those superbs, which are even more like definitive in Megamix, because superbs are actually like score. They give you a score value for every single one, and superb is like within a certain value that they show you. And so even if you get a superb, if it's a superb that's like just barely getting in there, which I think is 85, it's either 85 or 90, but like you get an 85 or a 90 and you get a superb, and you're like, I could do better than that. And then there's a selection of games. There's definitely a lot of stinkers in there, and not a lot of new ones. It's very much a WarioWare Gold for Rhythm Heaven games. But of the returning ones, a lot of them are really good. There's a few that they add new versions of that aren't exactly the best. Like Figure Fighter gets a new, like, easier version and a new harder version. Or no, the harder version is still Figure Fighter 2. That wasn't Fever, right? But it gets a new easier version, and the easier version is like way too easy. It's like tutorial level easy. If anything, the tutorial for Rhythm Heaven is probably harder when they start blocking your vision, and you have to just go off the rhythm for where your like indicator is. And like I assume that the reason they did it was because maybe Megamix is like intended to be either the send off or a revival for the series. If it's a revival, it's not a very good one, considering we haven't gotten a new Rhythm Heaven since then. But if it's supposed to be a jumping on point, then I would understand why they want to introduce some, like, stupid baby easy rhythm games at the beginning. But they didn't have to make new, easier versions of other rhythm games to do that. Fever started off with some really easy games that are very well served as tutorials, like the golfing one. It's just you hit one button, and then occasionally you hit one button in a slightly different timing. Like, of Fever's beginning games, which I think are Golf, Seesaw, Screwbots, and one more that I'm not remembering, unfortunately. But of those, I think that Screwbots is the only one that's kind of hard, because it's a different input that's also not just you press this thing on the beat, you also have to release on the beat, and so you just gotta be able to measure out timings like that in rhythm, which isn't like, that crazy, but for someone who's never played a rhythm game before or doesn't know that much about music, it's probably going to be a little bit jarring. So I definitely understand the idea of wanting to do easy games to ease people in, but they're so easy that anyone who's played a rhythm game before is going to be bored to tears by them, and anyone who hasn't played a rhythm game before isn't going to be getting a very good scope of what exactly is in store for them if they continue to play this rhythm game. But, and then, just in general, a lot of the new games were also really good. a standout in particular being the new Samurai Slice. The visual style is not exactly one of my favorites. It's very much like, hey gamers, you know video games and retro video games? Isn't this so retro because it's pixel? So I don't like the aesthetic all that much. But in terms of the actual song, it's fucking awesome. And then the animations that play when you hit the beats are also really fucking awesome. Especially in Samurai Slice 2. It only happens once. There's one lightning strike animation, which I'm not biased, but there's one lightning strike animation that's just really cool. And it makes me wish that there were a few more new games from Megamix, because they clearly had good ideas and good songs, but I guess that wasn't really what they were going for with Megamix, because, I mean, it's in the title, it's supposed to be a combination of a lot of Rhythm Heaven stuff, mostly the games, not so much the side content, but I guess that's just how it ended up, which I guess leads me into some of the things that I didn't like about it, which are that, going for perfects is now no longer in any way comfortable, because the way it used to work with Rhythm Heaven was that once you beat Remix 10, or whatever the final remix is for the game, you'd be able to just go to any other rhythm game and then try to go for a perfect. Because instead of the random chance that you might be able to get the opportunity to go for a perfect, it would just be, hey, you can go in, and if you get it a perfect, it's a perfect. But Megamix decided to do something a little bit different, where once you beat the final remix, you still only have the opportunity to get a perfect in a game. There's just always going to be an opportunity. Like, as soon as one game goes out, a new game will come in, which is technically almost the same as what they did before, but nowhere near as convenient. Because now, if I want to get a perfect in a specific game, I have to wait for it to be in rotation, and I don't even know if it is a rotation or if it's just random, because when I went through them, I was good enough at most of the games to just do them whenever they came up, but I wonder if I'd actually tried to experiment with the games that came up from the perfect screen, if it was actually just a rotation throughout every game that I hadn't perfected yet, or if it was genuinely just random, and if you're trying to get a perfect in a game that you know you can do it in, but it's just not coming up, then you can go fuck yourself. It's just a lot of annoying things about Megamix. Oh, also, there's in-game currency that gates you off from playing the rest of the game until you grind up enough money, assuming you spent on other things, which I did for the most part, because there are collectibles in the game that have like fun little descriptions, and I went through most of the game thinking, oh, you know, these are nice. This is actually something cool to like try and get superbs and skill stars on games so I can get more money to buy little collectibles. But it turns out, no, you want to keep that money for when you get to those goddamn skill gates with the endless games. Because if you don't have enough money, your ass is going to have to walk your ass back to whatever minigame you're really good at, so that you can grind up them skill stars and grind up them superbs, so that you can possibly have the chance at trying again when you have enough money. And I just hate the whole concept. The thing I loved about Rhythm Heaven Fever, and then even by extension DS, even though I didn't like it as much, is that it's a very straightforward rhythm game. You have these games, you play them, when you beat them, you get to play the next one. And I just don't know why Megamix felt this need to include a system where it's like, no, we need to beat this specific game in a specific way. And it just wasn't very fun. Which isn't to mention the fact that Megamix also felt the need to have a story for some reason. It goes into way more than just the actual like main plot of the game where you play through all the rhythm games. It even insists upon itself when it comes to the perfects, because everything has to be done through a dialogue screen now. It can't just be a menu you go through where you click on, hey, I want to do this perfect, or hey, I want to buy this item. It can't just be a menu. It has to be you talking to a character. And there's just so much dialogue, and it never goes fast enough because you can't skip through it. And then once the dialogue box actually ends, even when you press A, it's not exactly done yet. It takes like a little bit of a second to actually go through and disappear. And it's just not intuitive, and it feels like a huge waste of time. For everything that Megamix gets right, there's just a lot of very small things that make me wonder why they did it. And especially being so experimental with what is, at this point, again, the last Rhythm Heaven game. So I don't know what they could have possibly been thinking to just get weird with it at the end. But then, finally, to end my Rhythm Heaven journey, I ended up playing Rhythm Tengoku, which is the original Rhythm Heaven for the Game Boy Advance. And I was worried about being able to play Tengoku because obviously it's from Japan. It's never been translated to English, at least officially. And so I was worried that I might have trouble navigating the menus or finding out how the games worked, things like that, whenever I finally booted up the game. But as a testament to how simple and clean Rhythm Heaven's UI is, and just general structure, I knew where everything was just from, like, intuition, really. There's very few menus to actually get to the fucking video games, which Megamix could not say. I fear anyone who tried to play that game untranslated. But yeah, there's very few menus to get wherever you're trying to go. And then even once you get into a game, like, the descriptions of the game themselves will be in Japanese, but then when you actually get to, like, doing the tutorial for the games that they show you, it's generally just pretty straightforward, which is, again, what I've always liked about Rhythm Heaven as a series, you know, in the short time that I've been playing them, is that everything's just simple, straightforward. You can hop right in, even without being able to understand the language the game is in. And of course, like, I had a little bit of help from knowing Japanese, at least a little bit. Even just being able to know the alphabet helped me navigate to, like, oh, I know that, you know, Geimu means games, so I know we go to that section to get to the rhythm games. But even without that, I'm sure I would have done just fine getting through the menus and all that, because it's very intuitive and straightforward. And so I appreciate Tengoku a lot for that. In terms of the game itself, it's very Rhythm Heaven DS, where there are definitely high highs, but there are absolutely low lows. And unfortunately, Tengoku does not have the excuse of having a bad control scheme. Not that it's an excuse for DS either. At least for DS, it's like a bad thing about the game. That's like, well, yeah, it's a bad thing about the game. Whereas with Tengoku, having a few stinkers here and there when it comes to the rhythm games, it's like, we just made bad games. But I'll definitely say that Tengoku peaks with the remixes. There's one song that I don't remember the Japanese name for it. I was gonna say Tokimeki no Story, but that's one of Megamix's remixes, which Megamix also had really good remixes, especially in the song department. The games were a little bit here and there because they get weird near the end, but in terms of the songs, yeah, they absolutely hit out the park. But for Rhythm Tengoku, there's one where, again, don't remember the Japanese name, but I remember the English name is, I think, Waiting for You, or Can't Stop Waiting for You, something like that. And it's really fucking good, to the point where I listen to the song regularly without any of the Rhythm Heaven stuff behind it. Which you could argue that a lot of people do for Rhythm Heaven music, because it's just good. But there are a few Rhythm Heaven songs that I particularly like listening to with the game sound effects with them. I know specifically Remix 5 from Fever. I love listening to the actual game sound effects with that. And that's partially because for that remix specifically, they very much do a good job at lining up the game sound effects with the actual music so that it sounds like one cohesive whole. But the point being, I do like listening to the sound effects sometimes, but Waiting for You, or whatever the song is called, was just so fucking good that I did not want to, like, even when I first played it, I got distracted by the song and I didn't beat it on my first try, because it was just that good. They also put some really good visuals behind it, which isn't the case for a lot of Rhythm Heaven remixes. Sometimes you get, like, a Fever remix too, where it just kind of looks ugly and lazy and not very interesting, with a weird, pointless theme. But yeah, remixes in Tengoku were really good. And then beyond that, Tengoku was just a solid experience. I'd probably put it on the same level as DS. You know, they're both 7s, but for different reasons. DS held back by the control scheme and a few bad games, whereas with GBA, with Tengoku, it's just a few bad games. It's also, it doesn't feel like it's nearly as long, because each remix has 5 songs instead of 4, like the other Rhythm Heavens do, but there's also only 8 remixes, which for a total makes up only 40 songs, you know, quick maths, but in the other games, it's also 40, so why does Tengoku feel like it's so much shorter? And I think the reason for that is because Tengoku is very much a smaller scale game, so even games that get repeats, like Polyrhythm, I don't think that's what it's called, in the other Rhythm Heaven games, but the one where you've got the stick and the blocks. In Fever and in DS, actually, and I guess in Megamix, it wasn't part of the main story. That whole game lasts way longer than it does in Tengoku. In Tengoku, it's like 8 measures. I shouldn't say measures, because I don't know music terminology off the top of my head like that. But if you imagine like one string of notes where it's like do 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 do, it does that 8 times and the song's over. Which, you know, I still like the game for that, because they have you press both the face buttons and the directional pad to move 2 different sticks with blocks, and it gets really interesting near the end. It's actually famously, I don't know about famously, but it's talked about a lot in the Rhythm Heaven community as being one of the harder games in the series, and I definitely felt that the very first time I played it. But then, weirdly enough, the more I played it, the more it just kind of sank into the background, and the buttons just kind of came to me. Which you could argue is kind of the case for all rhythm games, because that's like the point. But I feel like if they start to, you know, just melt into you, it's not that they were hard necessarily, it's just that there was some barrier to entry physically that was stopping your hands from keeping up with what your brain was hearing. Or seeing. But, point being, polyrhythm is way shorter in Tengoku, and so even though there's the same amount of games in Tengoku as in DS and Fever, not Megamix. Megamix has like way more games, but that's for obvious reasons. Despite having 40 games in all 3 of the first Rhythm Heavens, Tengoku feels so much shorter because they don't ask you for all that much when it comes to actually playing the games. And then, in terms of just the Rhythm Heaven series in general, I'm glad that I got into it. They're probably my favorite rhythm games that I've ever played. Not that there's a whole lot of competition. Like, what else is there that I played? Osu. I don't really like Osu because I don't have that good mouse hand-eye coordination. At least not when it comes to flicking 2 places on my screen quickly. Like, you know, play a shooter and it's fine, because I point and shoot. But with Osu, it's like, oh yeah, here's a block, a certain, or a thing to click on a certain distance away that you have to get to in like the next half a second. I'm just not good at judging that distance instantly. Especially since I change the sensitivity on my mouse very regularly. And so even if I did know the distance for one sensitivity, if I ever changed it and then forgot to change it back for when I was playing whatever game, I'm sure I wouldn't be able to judge it again the same way. But I'm sad that it doesn't seem like we're gonna get a new Rhythm Heaven anytime soon, if ever. Though I suppose I can say that about a lot of games, certainly ones we'll be talking about throughout the series. And I'm glad I've gotten into it. And I guess, spoiler, but I do plan on doing a review of not just Fever, but all 4 Rhythm Heaven games. It's definitely going to be a review for Fever, but just a review for the other ones, because I've never done that before, obviously. And like I said, there's a lot of things I don't like so much about the Fever review anymore, so not only will I be doing that over, I'll also just try to be more substantive when I talk about the other games, so it's less of a surface level observation that doesn't really go far beyond, I kind of like this one, it has cool visuals, and the song was good, anyway. But yeah, there's not all that much to talk about there. That'll come when it comes. Hopefully, sometime within the before next summer, but given my current recording situation, which is to say I don't have one, or at least I don't have a good one, what you're hearing right now is me sitting in my room with my comforter draped over my PC, which I hope isn't making it very hot. Probably not. This is very minimum level of heat right now with just Audacity and like Google Chrome running. But yeah, my recording situation right now is not high quality, let's say that. And so I'm not going to make any video essays until I can get that back as a situation. Which is part of why I figured it was finally time to start this series, but I digress. Next up is the Arkham games, the Batman Arkham games, you know, as opposed to the Superman Arkham games. And interestingly enough, I started my Arkham playing with Arkham Knight like years and years and years ago, and I liked it the most, or I liked it a lot, because I just think that Arkham Knight is a cool game. Though, spoiler from what I just said, I ended up liking Arkham Knight the most, even when I went back to play Asylum, City, and Origins. And it's not that the other 3 are bad, or even not that good necessarily. I mean, well, Asylum maybe, but Origins and City, they were alright. The problem is just that they weren't Knight, and I know that it might be a little bit unfair to drag down other games just because they're not as good as a different game, but it's not a simple matter as like both games are 10 out of 10s, but one's obviously better, and so I have to bring the other one down. No. Arkham Knight is like such magnitudes better than every other Arkham game that they have to go like multiple points down. They can't just be a 9 compared to Knight's 10. Asylum in particular was one that I didn't have a lot of patience for because it very much has a Metroidvania style design, and if you know anything about me, I do not like Metroidvanias. So just walking back and forth throughout the island without nearly the movement options that the later Arkham games present you with, it was just a hassle for me, and I wasn't a fan of it. But then, like, you know, when it came to the minutia, it was a good Arkham game. A lot of the puzzles were still good Arkham stuff. The combat, not as fleshed out as the future games, obviously, but at a base level, it's all mostly the same stuff, and I liked it. The problem really came from the stealth, or not, I shouldn't say the problem, but when I noticed that I wasn't having nearly as much fun with Arkham Asylum, because stealth is my favorite thing to do in Arkham Knight. It is one of my favorite video game mechanics ever, and Arkham Knight I think is the best one I've ever played, which I know sounds bold coming from someone who made a video about Metal Gear Solid, the entire series, or at least the mainline ones, the ones that matter. But Arkham Knight is definitely one of the best. And so when I played Arkham Asylum, I was very much let down by the stealth because there is like nothing to it. And again, I understand that it's not fair to say that, oh yeah, it's not Arkham Knight, because in Arkham Knight they had way more ideas for like gadgets and enemies and things to do with the stealth that weren't just, hey, here's a couple of guys, get behind them and press the Y button. But that's kind of just what I ended up doing for Arkham Asylum. That there were a bunch of guys, and so I got up behind them and pressed the Y button. And Arkham Asylum just doesn't generally ask you for a lot when it comes to the stealth, which I feel is like a third of the entire Arkham experience. If it's combat, puzzles, and stealth, I think that not having stealth be a very good thing in the game kind of drags down the entire experience by like a lot. There are some specific stealth sections with like context-sensitive things that I liked, like the Killer Croc section, despite how it might not make all that much sense like in the story, but you know, there's a lot of concessions you end up having to make for gameplay and story, and if it ends up affecting the story, then sometimes it's just like, so be it. Small potatoes in the grand scheme of, do we want good gameplay or good story? Even then, it's not necessarily a thing of a good story, it's more of a consistent story. Because you can have a good story even with small inconsistencies like, hey, why doesn't this character do this? But it comes down to a lot of the what you can accept, either that or how much it affects the story in general. Because if it's like a snowball effect where it affects the entire story and fucks everything up, it's kind of hard to ignore that. Because it takes away from my enjoyment of the story to know that there was just one part that they seem to not really care about. But this is obviously not the case for Arkham Asylum. I'm just talking about other bullshit. Maybe I'll make a story time bunker where I talk about Bleach and why I hate it, and Fire Force and why I hate it, and Dragon Ball and why I hate it. Honestly, there's a lot of manga that I read that I hate, but we'll cross that bridge when we maybe get to it. For now, I'm a gaming channel. Let's just keep it at that. And then Arkham City is the one that everyone says is the best Arkham game, because I know people are very polarized on Knight, let's say, for a lot of reasons that I'll probably end up getting to. But I hear that, you know, instead of Knight, that City is the best Arkham game. And I see in my mind's eye why people would say that. But I don't understand it. Like, I can see and comprehend the reasons that people list out when they say that City's the best one. And then even playing City, I can see the things that people would point to and go, yeah, this is what makes it the best one. But when I think about them, they just don't click, you know? One of the most annoying things about City is the gliding. So again, it might not be fair to compare this to Knight, but in Knight, they actually fleshed out the gliding physics so that you basically gain as much lift as you do from a dive. You want to constantly be gliding and diving, because that's how you conserve all your height. But in City, they weren't really focused on that, it seems, because there's only a set height you can go from the grapple launch. And then once you've gone off from that launch, you can dive, but you won't really gain much height coming back up from that. And it's just nowhere near as satisfying to glide in City as it is in Night, which makes getting around the actual titular city not all that fun. You just kind of pick a direction and hold the A button while you glide peacefully over to where you're trying to go. And I also wasn't particularly interested in any of the side content for City, not just because of the whole flying problem, but also because of the side content that I did do for City, they just weren't all that good. Like, I did the Mad Hatter's side quest, and I was thinking, oh, this is going to be interesting, because the Mad Hatter side quest in Night is taking you all around the city, and then, you know, doing a bunch of cryptographs, which aren't exactly the most engaging thing in the world, but it was, you know, a nice little environmental puzzle to try and find the cars that had the people in them, even if you could kind of just use detective vision. Yeah, no, I'll admit the Mad Hatter isn't a perfect example because it was kind of stinky in Night too, but I thought it was going to be something more than just you go up to a thing and the Mad Hatter's like, hey, fight some guys, then you fight some guys and you leave. And there are just a lot of side quests in Arkham City that are fight some guys and then leave, to the point where even when I got to the ones that were different, like Hush's, you do it and it's kind of just like a story reveal where it's like, hey, here's the guy, here's Hush, he looks like Bruce Wayne, okay, bye, and it just has a kind of anticlimactic ending. Which, to be fair, Knight has a lot of the same things, especially when it comes to a certain stroker, but City felt like it happened way more often, than even when it didn't happen, the mission itself wasn't satisfying. It was just, you know, fight some guys and leave. And then, you know, the main story, it's the main story. I feel like people give it a little bit too much credit, because it's not as janky as Knight's story, but City is also definitely very, what's the word? I don't want to say go here and get thing, because that's a lot of video games, so it doesn't feel like a very fair criticism, at least not without more explanation. But a lot of City is you go to a place for a specific reason, not necessarily to get a thing, but you go to a place for a reason, you know, stealth and combat your way through a few rooms or even a building, and then you go back to what you were trying to do in the first place, which is whatever the Joker asks you to do. And then I feel like City, again, not quite as much, but City gets close to being as messy as Knight's story near the end, where Ra's al Ghul is now suddenly way more important to the story than he was like 10 minutes ago. And now suddenly Clayface is also one of the main villains by technicality, and then Joker fucking dies. And so I feel like people are just a little bit too ready to give praise to City. And then, like, I wasn't around the internet all that much back when Knight first came out, or at least, you know, in the sections of the internet that I was on, it wasn't people like shit talking Knight. It was just people being like, yo, new Batman game. So I don't know what people thought about City before Knight coming out, and maybe even before Origins, considering that game isn't very loved either. But I don't know exactly how people felt about City before Knight came out, but for people to so easily call it the best Arkham game when Knight just has like twice as good gameplay and a story that isn't really that much worse, and side quests that are far, far better, I don't really understand why people gravitate to City more than they do Knight. I don't want to call it nostalgia, but it very much feels like that Batman Arkham fans are the exact age where they would have played the original games, or the Arkham City, when they were like teenagers, when they would have appealed to them the most. And then when Knight finally came around, a few years later, they were maybe a little bit older, and they didn't like it as much. And now, I never want to attribute motivation where I have no proof for it, so I can't really say that that's exactly the case, especially with nostalgia, because, you know, everyone feels nostalgia for a lot of things. So saying, you're nostalgic for this, that's why you like it, as opposed to it being good, it's not really, you know, substantive. It might be true, but it's something I can prove, and even if I could prove it, I'd have to prove to what magnitude it's coloring their judgment. And that's just a lot that I don't want to ascribe to a person unfairly. But, come on guys, City, really? Over Knight, really? Now City over Origins, I can understand. I don't particularly agree. As far as I'm concerned, Origins and City are like on the same level. And That one, again, I don't want to ascribe motivation where I can't prove it, but it very much feels like the only reason people don't like that game is because it wasn't made by Rocksteady. Because in terms of the actual gameplay, it's like a carbon copy of City, which I guess might be the other reason that people don't really like it, is that it might be too similar to City. But I don't feel like that's enough reason to call Origins a bad game, or at least so bad that it's not worth getting put in any of the Arkham collections, or being sold with the rest of the games on Steam, or just generally being ignored by the fan base at large. To the point where if you ask someone what Arkham games to play, which, they're pretty straightforward, but people ask a lot of stupid questions. But if someone were to ask, how do I get into the Arkham series? What games do I play? What order? They'll just be like, oh yeah, you play Asylum, City, and then Knight. People just don't like Origins all that much, and I don't get it. Because even if the problem was that it was a carbon copy of City, that doesn't make Origins worthless. That just makes them equally worthless to each other. Because if you played Origins first, then would you have any reason to play City? Assuming, of course, that is the reason people don't like Origins, as opposed to whatever other reason. Because again, like with the Knight to City comparisons, I don't really understand what people are talking about when they're like, oh yeah, Origins, that one sucks. Because I played it, and it's just like Arkham City, with a slightly different map and slightly different things to do. So I can't understand how there could be some order of magnitude that Origins is so much worse than City. I just don't get it. And in terms of Knight, I circled back around to it after I played the other games. Like I said, I played Knight first, and then I played the rest of them. And I came back to Knight to get 240% in it, which, as far as I'm concerned, is like 100% for the game. I don't want to do a bunch of fucking combat challenges for those achievements, man. And I'll admit, it's because they're hard. But at the same time, I also don't like the combat. And the game says that I did everything in it twice. Once on a normal game and once on New Game Plus. So, if the game's telling me that I'm really fucking good at it, and I've done everything, then as far as I'm concerned, I'm really fucking good at it and I've done everything. And hey, if I need to make up the stars from AR challenges to, make up for the ones that aren't in the combat challenges, because I didn't do any of them, then just take one of the 200 extra stars that I earned from doing all the other characters in stealth mode. Because for basically every stealth mission, after I beat it with the character it was intended for, I would just go back and restart it with the other characters that it wasn't exactly intended for. And I still had a lot of fun, except for with Harley. I don't like Harley stealth, because it's kind of not stealth. But, yeah. I don't even know if there's much that I can say about Knight that isn't very surface level, because, a lot of it already said. Knight is just a better version of, every other Arkham game. There's better and more enemy variety. There's better and more gadgets. There's better and more stealth. There's better and more combat. There's better and more of the open world. There's better and more side content. Everything in Knight, minus the story maybe, which I don't even think it's that bad, but I'll admit I haven't dug that deep into it. But I don't think Knight's story is that bad. Aside from potentially the story, everything in Knight is better than every other Arkham game, and I don't know what the argument is for that not being the case. I guess you could argue that Knight is the worst because Batman didn't call the Justice League when the cloudburst happened. Is he stupid? But again, that brings me back to the small things about the story, where it's does this completely break it or just kind of break it? And considering the situation, I'd say it's only a kind of break, because Batman already had a plan for how to get rid of the cloudburst. He needed Ivy. It just happened to actually go off earlier than was intended. And I guess this isn't exactly an Arkham game thing to talk about, but killed the Justice League. That was crazy, right? It's weird how Rocksteady was made to do the stupid Warner Bros. Live service bullshit that I swear no one likes. I don't know why they keep doing it. Well, okay, I do know why they keep doing it. It's because the potential for monetary gain is too high not to take the risk. I wouldn't agree, but clearly a lot of executives disagree with me, so who am I, right? And then WB Games was sent back to work on Gotham Knights. And that's just so weird to me, because I would assume that Warner is aware of people not liking Origins. And again, I'm not gonna say it's because Rocksteady didn't make that game, but the truth of the matter is, WB Games made Arkham Origins and Rocksteady did not. So when it came time to make 2 more Batman games, one in the style of the Arkham City series, to the point where they are where the main 4 heroes are are all feasibly from the Arkham universe, and Batman is gone, like what happened at the end of Arkham Knight. Not the same context, but it definitely Gotham Knights reeks of, guys, this isn't Arkham, but like, what if it is? It's just, it feels a lot like a trap to get people in who liked Arkham, even though it has nothing to do with that. It wasn't made by the same people. But like, I feel like if it was made by the same people wouldn't even give a shit about the story being different. Because the whole story ending in Night is meant to be ambiguous and not really followed up upon. A lot of people do want to follow up on it, but that's a different conversation. And so if Rocksteady came out with a different Arkham game where all the playable characters are different, because, no Batman, but the story's different, maybe instead of having Batman be dead or missing, just have him be retired. Whatever works to establish that's a different universe, and then just make Gotham Knights in the style of the good games you made, and then people wouldn't have been so pissy about Gotham Knights. Especially since it was an unoptimized piece of shit that no one actually wanted to play. I think you put Rocksteady on the live service bullshit that people equally don't want to play, because live service bullshit is in fact live service bullshit. And the actual gameplay of Suicide Squad is just shooting guys. Sure, you get some fucking hero abilities, but they're not very impactful, or even all that fun to use. Except for maybe Harley's grappling hook, because you can actually, do some stuff with momentum, but it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. I will say that there's one criticism of Kill the Justice League that I think is kind of not unwarranted. What's the word? Fucking stupid. Where a lot of people seem to not be on board with the game, just from the simple premise of, well, I don't want to kill the Justice League. And it's like, well, why not? It's a game where you play as the villains. You do villainly things, which includes killing the Justice League. It's not like you're literally taking the characters in the real world and ripping out all their comics and saying, no more Justice League, they're all done now. It's a video game where you play as the villains trying to do villain things like kill the heroes. So what's like the fundamental problem with killing the Justice League? Or are you that much of a stick in the mud that you can't even kill the good guys in a fictional video game? Does it really matter that much to you? I know I understand that for some people it wasn't really that, it was more so, well, why the Suicide Squad? The Suicide Squad's a bunch of fucking jackasses. I don't think they're going to be able to kill Superman or Wonder Woman, or shit, even Green Lantern. And I understand that end of the criticism. The only problem is really that, and this might be my very limited scope of the Suicide Squad coloring my perception, but from what I understood of the Suicide Squad, they're supposed to be a gang of villains who are just kind of shitty, They're on death row or whatever, but they can reduce their sentences. But it's made up of some not powerhouses, but like villains who are a part of the hero's rogues gallery. And if you're a part of Superman's rogues gallery, even if you're not like Darkseid, you still have the potential to, cripple, weaken, or even just kill Superman, depending on the canon, because how strong that boy is changes seemingly from day to day. But, typically a villain from each's rogues gallery, and if they're a villain from the rogues gallery, that means they're probably theoretically able to beat them. They don't, because, it's not really how the stories are written, but they could. That's why there's stakes. And I know you can't exactly put, like, Sinestro in the fucking Suicide Squad to be able to stand up to a Green Lantern. But I don't know any other Green Lantern villains, which is weird, because I like Green Lantern a lot, and I would definitely consider him one of my favorite heroes. But I haven't read a lot of Green Lantern stuff, which I plan on changing eventually, just not anytime all that soon. I have a lot of comics to get through. I have a very, very long backlog. My comic backlog is probably longer than my game one, and I'm making a whole fucking series about this, so what was to say about my comics? Point being, there are probably people that I don't have any awareness of. There are Green Lantern villains that they could have pulled without trying to A, make Deadshot a Green Lantern villain, and then B, trying to retcon in why this Deadshot looks like, I was gonna say looks like Will Smith, but no, he doesn't look like Will Smith at all. But he doesn't look like Idris Elba either. They just made him a black guy, because the last two, because the Deadshot in 2016 was a black guy, and the guy that they got to be not really Deadshot, but kind of Deadshot in the Suicide Squad 2021 was also black. And so they had to retcon in some reason for the other Deadshot to have been a different guy. And it's like, oh, he's from Earth too. Which is fucking stupid, because how the hell did he even get over here? They might explain it in the game, but I didn't play it, and I don't want to play it. Nor will I ever play it, so I suppose I'll never know. They honestly, it was just so much easier. They could have just made this Deadshot kill the other guy, and be like, no, I'm Deadshot now. I'm a better shot, so I'm the Deadshot. I'm not saying that it has to be like that one tweet where it's like, oh yeah, then Nightwing takes off his shirt and says, Nightwing, what a joke, and then puts on Deathstroke's helmet and calls himself Dickstroke, or any of that bullshit. But it's as simple as, if Deadshot is a title, then what happens when there's a guy who's a better shot than you? He kills you and then takes your title. I don't know why they had to make it a multiverse thing. I guess you could call it foreshadowing for the multiverse things that would end up happening throughout Kill the Justice League, but they shouldn't have done that either, so as far as I'm concerned, it was always a doomed process. But that's enough about games I didn't play. To get more into games that I did in fact play, minus technically one, but you know. This one's also a much shorter series, so I probably won't spend like 25 minutes talking about the whole thing like I did for the last two. Meaning this will probably end up being either a far longer video than I intended, or multiple videos, which presents its own problems, but, you know, a bridge I'll cross when I get to it. So, the world ends with you. The world ends with you is an actual quote in the game, like they say that. There's always a funny moment in any piece of media where they go, hey, the Thing, I am Iron Man. But unfortunately, despite how stylish The World Ends With You is, and despite how many things that I want to like about it, actually playing the game was fucking horrible, and I didn't like it. I shouldn't say that it was all bad, because it wasn't. There were definitely bright spots, but they were few and far between, and they didn't really shine all that brightly anyway. I'd say the strongest area of the game was definitely the very beginning, because of all the partners and the way they work in combat, Shiki's was the least intrusive, and the most like an actual side thing to be doing while you're doing like all of Neku's combat. Whereas Josh simply did not result in anything most of the time, and Beat is too much of an involved process to be able to only give half your attention to it. Shiki's was a simple, you know, result between three, and so it's very, and they were shapes instead of, you know, numbers, of which there are only 3 of them as opposed to 9. 10 actually, because all 10 digits. And so it was far easier to go along Shiki's paths in the corner of your eye, or while only half paying attention to both screens, because the Shiki's, you only really had to look for one thing, and you could look for it consistently with whatever you were trying to do. Which for me was mostly just using slash pins as Neku, because the movement in The World Ends With You is not good. Like, in the overworld, it's not that bad, because you can just tap where you want to go, or just scroll over to wherever. But in combat, you constantly have to wrestle with being able to move your character, and be able to, and not trying to use the pins you have equipped. Like, trying to move Neku while having any slash or drag pins equipped is a fucking nightmare. Because maybe you just want to drag Neku away from wherever the fuck he's at, and now suddenly, oh, this actually counts as a slash in the enemy that's like standing a little bit too close to where your stylus is, or a drag across the screen that you can't make Neku do a slide at all because it's all being counted as a drag for like your fire pin or whatever. God knows I don't remember any of the names. But yeah, I mean, I talked about the partners a little bit, but in terms of Neku's gameplay, like I said, it was mostly just slash and bullet pins for me, because slashes, even though it would make it hard to move Neku myself, slashes automatically bring Neku to whoever enemy you're trying to attack, so I would just equip a shit ton of slash pins and then wail on whatever enemies I was trying to get close to, and if I needed to move away from them, I would just wail on a different enemy, as opposed to trying to waste my time with some esoteric, fucked up pin that doesn't do exactly what I want it to all the time, and doesn't even do that much damage anyway. And then bullets are just nice projectiles, simple as. Plus they're taps, which I don't think you do for any other action. Kind of. not counting holds, but Then they get into like pin priority, which I'm pretty sure they don't tell you about, but I'm not 100% sure because I feel like I figured that out randomly. It's a whole thing. I don't like the World Ends With You's combat, which isn't to say that it's like all doomed by the touchscreen. It could have been good. It just wasn't very well optimized because there's interesting things to do with the touchscreen, like the way you even get enemies to fight you. You turn on your scan mode and then you just tap as many as you can within your little time limit, which I think is actually more interesting. It's kind of more interesting than what they do in Neo: The World Ends With You, only in that Neo's doesn't really get interesting until like the very end of the game, basically. So with The World Ends With You, it's always a consistent case of you have to quickly survey your area and be like, okay, which enemies do I want to fight? How many of them do I want to fight? And am I quick enough to click all the ones that I want to fight in like quick succession? So there's just a little bit more to it, but that's just the combat. The outside of combat gameplay was also really fucking bad because there's this whole system of evolving the pins to become even stronger that require 3 different kinds of pin EXP. Why 3? I don't know. Maybe fucking life just hates me. But there's the one which is battle EXP, which is pretty straightforward. You know, you use the pin in battle, you get EXP for it. It's, you know, fair enough. Then there's sleep EXP, or idle EXP, what was it called? Passive EXP? Something like that. But EXP that you can only get from having your system not be on, or not have the game opened. And so it's only EXP that you can get after a certain amount of time has passed, which is fucking stupid. Like, I got a pin, and I want to use it so I can play the rest of the game, but I have to just turn my shit off and then put it away for like a day so I can earn maybe 1 level on it. To the point where it was obviously just far easier to change the time on my 3DS. And then I would change it back after I had the pin in my possession. The evolved pin, obviously. Or sometimes, if I had a lot of them, I wouldn't even bother changing it back. I would be like, you know, I know I'm gonna end up doing more of this evolving shit later anyway, so I might as well just leave the date. It's not like I was using my 2DS as a clock anyway, so I don't particularly care about the dates being all that accurate. Aside from, I guess, the activity log, I do like looking at the stats sometimes, and it's fucked up by a few of the times where I've changed my 3DS date, to the point where I didn't get a 3DS until 2013, but I looked at my fucking Animal Crossing stats, and it's like, oh yeah, the last time you played was 2011, and it's like, or no, sorry, the first time I played was 2011, and that just wouldn't have been possible, because I didn't have a 3DS. I don't even think it was out in 2011, it came out in 2012, right? I want to say. But yeah, off topic. Point being, that was a stupid way to evolve pins, but it wasn't even the dumbest one. It was a stupid way to evolve pins, and yet somehow it just wasn't even the worst one. The worst one was Friend EXP, which is EXP that you can only get from doing essentially Street Pass before Street Pass, because The World Ends With You came out for the DS, not the 3DS, and so whenever you pass people with your DS's, you know, normally for most things, it didn't do anything because, you know, they didn't invent it yet. But somehow the World Ends With You devs, they made it so that if you passed the people who had The World Ends With You, you got EXP from just passing them, and so that would go towards your friend EXP pins. And it's an interesting idea, but it's fucking stupid, and I hate it, and there's no point to it, and it's just really bad. Now, luckily, it's not completely impossible to evolve pins in the year 2020. Well, I played it in 2022, and obviously there are not many people walking around with The World Ends With You just hanging out in their DS or 3DS. So luckily, it wasn't impossible to get Friend EXP. It's just a random chance that an NPC will show up and give you Friend EXP when you have your system in sleep mode. And sometimes I'd get like 10 NPCs, and I wouldn't have to worry about Friend EXP for a while. And sometimes I'd wait like an entire day and get 1. And there's just more waiting. There's just so much motherfucking waiting. And it doesn't even talk about the food system, where you have to eat to like increase your stats. You can only eat so much within a real ass day. And so if you want to improve your stats more, you just have to stop playing the game and come back tomorrow, which is fucking stupid, as I've already mentioned, for many other things in this game. And it just felt like such a waste of time at a lot of points, which isn't even talking about the story. Like, I won't say the story was a waste of time the entire time, but it's very much front and back loaded, where the front of it is really good, and the back of it is pretty good. I don't know about really, but you know, the back of it's pretty good. But the middle part, the part where you're fucking around with Joshua, it's just so bad because nothing happens, and Joshua is a bad character who says nothing of importance ever, and he's stupid. I hate him. And you waste my time with a bunch of stupid ass shit, like asking me questions about like, hey Nick, did you hear what I just said? And it's like, no, I didn't hear what you just said because it was boring. I didn't care. And I get that it's supposed to be the theme of the game is that, oh, Nick wasn't listening because he doesn't care. That's something he has to learn about. He has to learn to care more about other people because the world ends with him or something. But I don't think that you can really apply to Joshua because Joshua fucking sucks. I wouldn't care either. I hate Joshua. If he was talking, I would tell him I wasn't paying attention. And so, to put it simply, I don't like The World Ends With You, despite the fact that it seems to be a, what's the word? Not cult classic. Cult classic. It's a cult classic. Very niche audience, but they all apparently love it. And think it's like one of the best DS games ever, which, I mean, y'all got that, I guess. However, I do have far more positive things to say about its sequel, The World Ends With You Final Remix. Just kidding, The World Ends With You Neo, or Neo, The World Ends With You. Technically, Final Remix is a sequel to the original game, because it has endgame stuff that is canon and does lead into Neo. So it's like, oh yeah, if you want to completely understand The World Ends With You as a story, you gotta play the remake that no one liked because it controlled like shit. Though, I mean, if you ask me, the original kind of controlled like shit too, but I mean, you know, that's neither here nor there. But I finally got into Neo, and it was way better, simply by virtue of not controlling like shit. And the way pins working being a little bit different, you know, they're all tied to buttons now instead of, like, inputs. Which, again, is just way better because it fucking works, and I don't have to fight with the game to get any of my buttons to work. And they just revamp a lot of the systems that are not as shitty and stupid as the DS version. You don't have to do shitty and stupid things to upgrade pins now. You can just play the game. You don't have to wait real ass time to eat food now. You can just play the game. Wild concept, I know. The story is now much more straightforward, but I don't know if I would call Neo's particularly good either. It certainly gets a little bit fucked up in the middle, which I suppose is a pattern now. And near the end, it's definitely cool. I like it. It's very aesthetically pleasing. And I don't just mean visually. But in terms of like the actual writing, it's just got a lot of questions, you know? It's not very satisfying when a lot of the characters make decisions that I don't really understand. Because I don't understand them as characters, because they weren't really characters. They just kind of showed up and were there. But just like with Bleach, the real villain the whole time... you know, actually, I probably shouldn't say that. That's a pretty big spoiler for the game. Go play Neo, The World Ends With You. And I guess by definition, that would require you playing the original game. Which again, I don't like it, but I do think you should play it. It's definitely worth playing, especially if you want to be more invested in Neo's story. But yeah, I don't want to spoil any of that because it's interesting. And, you know, like I said, it gets messy, but I do like the aesthetics of Neo's ending, or I guess ending section. And it's definitely some mark of success for the game that I even want to replay it at all. Probably not for stream, because RPGs just generally don't sound like a good idea to me to do for a stream, unless I had like a huge audience, which I don't, evidently. So, probably not for a stream, but just like on PS4 or something, because I have it on Switch, is what I got Neo for, but the Switch is a stupid, shitty, bad console that doesn't have any achievements, and so I kind of want that stuff to be like, you know, set in stone, and so I kind of want to get it for PS4. I could get it for Steam, or on Steam, so I could play it on my Steam Deck, but then I wouldn't have it physically, and I want it physically so I can add to my collection, because I have the original physically. And I guess I also have Neo physically, just for Switch, but the Switch is worthless. So I guess you could argue that if I wanted just a physical version to have in my collection, I have the Switch one, and then I should get the Steam version so I can play it, like, conveniently, you know, wherever I am on my Steam Deck. But, I don't know. I'll see. I'll figure it out. And so, considering that I've been here for a little over an hour at this point, and I've only gotten through 3 of the series that I wanted to talk about, I'm going to... I'll talk about DMC. I'll talk about DMC, and then end it off here. And then talk about the rest of the series, and the gaming topic that I wanted to bring up for next time. Because I definitely had far more to say than I thought that I would. But this is why I wanted to do this experiment in the first place, to see how much I could actually talk off the cuff, without a script. Which you can probably tell from my various ums and uhs that I haven't actually noticed. That I will definitely notice when I go back to edit this. well, edit and strong quotation marks, but when I go back to, when I re-listen to this, I'll definitely hear all the ums and uhs, and think about how cringe it is, and think about cutting them out, but depending on how close they are to the rest of my sentences, I probably won't. And I don't get to do any retakes for when I, say things too quickly, and I sound like a fucking schizophrenic, and none of my lines come through clearly. Or a stutter, which typically happens when my brain's thinking way faster than my mouth can speak. Because I think the word, or my stutter, and then the entire rest of the sentence gets played out in my mind, and I go, wait, what was I actually trying to say? Or my mouth will get... This is a whole tangent. This is not important. Let's talk about Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry 1, I don't like it. And I understand... This is another one where I see what people are talking about when they say that it's like one of the best games ever. Because I understand what they mean when it's innovative, and it's very important to the action game genre as a whole. I understand these things. These things are not lost on me. However, when I play the video game, it's boring and I don't like it. So something must be wrong, either with the game or with me. And because I'm obviously perfect, it must be the game. And I think one of the things that annoyed me the most about DMC1 was how it didn't feel like the combos existed at all. Now granted, I had touched DMCs 5 and 3 before I played 1, and so maybe there's just some linking system that I don't know about for DMC1 that I was trying too hard to force my 3 and 5 gameplay into, but I felt like for 1, there just weren't enough moves to actually combo into each other for enough style, and then even when they did combo into each other, but even when there were enough moves, they just didn't flow together nicely to make for really anything that I could call stylish gameplay. It was kind of just me hitting guys until the game ended. Actually, no, that's not completely true. Once I got the grenade launcher, I just killed a lot of enemies by shooting that over and over again until they died. Because the grenade launcher did a lot of damage. Too much damage, some might say. And it was AoE, so it did a lot of damage to other people at the same time. And there's honestly just not much for me to say about DMC1. Like I said, it just felt very bare bones. It was me hitting guys. And again, I see what the things that people are saying when they say that it's innovative and it's important. I understand its importance, it's just not fun. Or at least I don't think it is. And if there is something fun about it that I missed, then, someone let me know. Let me know what I needed to do to enjoy DMC1. Because I want to like DMC1. I like the other games in the series. Almost. I guess the one right after DMC1 I didn't like all that much, for obvious reasons. But on the whole, I want to like DMC. So, and I didn't hate DMC1, I just didn't think it was all that good. I say hitting guys like it's derogatory, which it kind of is. But sometimes a game is good for just hitting guys. And I liked the Nero Angelo fights. But that's basically it. Oh, and the final boss being a shitty-ass, janky-ass rail shooter that just isn't a very good video game at all. Kinda maybe wanna commit, because it's so bad. First of all, inverted controls, ew, disgusting. Second of all, even minus the inverted controls, it's just a shitty shoot 'em up, or a rail shooter, whatever genre you want to put it in. It just wasn't very well designed, and it wasn't fun to play, and it's also not what I wanted in a fucking action game. Surprise, surprise. So I can't say I very well left DMC1 in a good impression either. And if I wasn't emulating it for the PS2, I probably would have quit playing it at that rail shooter section, because my god, it's so bad. It's just so bad. There's no worth to playing it. If I didn't have the save states to use, I would have quit because there was no actual purpose, and it would have just made me more mad to try and finish it at that point. Because of course this is also when games were far more brutal, which they're allowed to be when they're good, but DMC1 wasn't, so I don't know, convince me otherwise. They'll give me something to talk about for any future episodes of the series. And then DMC2 is very famously the one that everyone hates because it's the very obvious bad one. Hopefully it's the very obvious bad one. If Sonic 06 is anything to go off of given the internet's recent antics, there are certainly people who like to be a bit revisionist with games that everyone knows are bad. It's like, hey, remember Sonic 06 and how it's synonymous with bad video game, and it has been for, what, a decade at this point? More than? Almost 15 years, actually? Yeah, what if Sonic 06 is good, actually? What's actually an underrated gen? Shut up. No, get out of here. You know what? Considering how passionate I feel just bringing the subject up, I'll talk about that in a future episode. But for now, DMC2. Hopefully DMC2 does not get the Sonic 06 treatment, because everyone knows the game kind of sucks. And there's probably some good things in it, not any that I'm aware of. At least not any that I played, because I got up to the helicopter boss and I quit. Which I think, from what I hear, is where a lot of people end up dropping the game, because the helicopter boss is the one that makes you just sit there and shoot for like a really long time. And if you play DMC, you know the shooting isn't for damage, it's supposed to be for extending combos and giving you time to think while you stun an enemy or something. You're not supposed to just sit there and shoot an enemy until they die, but the DMC2 disagreed and said, hey, what if it was a whole boss, actually? And so I quit. And I feel no remorse. It's DMC2. It's not worth my time. So, not much to say about that. And then DMC3, which I played the Switch version of, by the way, because the Switch version is, for some reason, the only one where you can style switch and have all your weapons equipped at the same time. Why only the Switch version? I'll never know. And some people will argue that the game isn't designed to have all those systems, and so it's actually worse to play on the Switch version. But I disagree, for two reasons. Firstly, being that if you want to stick to one style or a few weapons, then you can just do that. You don't have to use everything just because you're given the option to. But even if you do decide to use everything, isn't that a good thing? It's like, even if DMC3 specifically wasn't designed for style switching and whatnot, being able to go from Royal Guard, which was very, very strict in DMC3, to a Trickster, to a Swordmaster, to some gun maneuver, to Royal Guard every time you're about to take damage, you know, being able to style switch efficiently is skill expression. It might not be the skill expression that was expressly meant when the game originally came out, but I would argue that the skill expression of style switching is just far more important. Considering that, you know, in the original game, the styles are just like, well, how do you like to play? Do you want more attacks? Do you want a dodge? Do you want a counter? Or do you want gun skills? And how many people chose Gunslinger at all in DMC3, even with style switching? Style switching probably gave it more utility, since you could easily dip in and out of it whenever you needed to. But in the original DMC3, who was ever like, yep, it's time to dedicate my entire time to Gunslinger? Potentially the worst style in every game it's been in. Even the very strict Royal Guard in DMC3 probably sees more use than Gunslinger. But I say all that to say that there's more to do with style switching, as opposed to just, what do you want your B button to do? Or A button if you're on Switch, which I was. And then in terms of the game itself, I liked DMC3 a lot. It's definitely got some obnoxious enemies in it, which I think is what the game is generally known for. But aside from them, I had a pretty good time. Even some of the more even enemies that people consider to be obnoxious, like the angels, I did not think were that bad. Like, yeah, it's annoying that they go through the floor and whatnot, but I would usually just kill them whenever they'd stop doing that. Because they would swing around their big stupid weapon, but they didn't move while doing it, so I would just bait them into swinging it and then get up behind them and kill them. So I don't think it was that bad, honestly. Maybe you all just suck at DMC3, actually. I did almost beat Cerberus on my first try, so, you know. Which, yeah, Cerberus is a very brutal first boss. Though, mysteriously, I somehow almost beat him first try. I think both times I played DMC3, because the very first time was me playing on a friend's Switch, and I almost beat Cerberus first try, and then I got fucked up, obviously. And then, when I finally got up my own copy, I almost beat him first try again, and then got fucked up. So, I guess I'm just really good at playing against Cerberus the first time that I get in my own head, or something. But, like, including Cerberus, the bosses in DMC3 are pretty good. Minus a few exceptions. Like, Cerberus, Agni and Rudra, which I think is a fan favorite. So I don't think it's really surprising to anyone to say that I really like that fight. And Beowulf, to an extent, were all really good fights. Oh, and all the Virgil fights, of course. Well, maybe not the last one, but that might be me being biased. I might get to that. But yeah, all the Virgil fights, obviously. Beowulf, to an extent. Cerberus, Agni and Rudra, all really good fights. There are a few middling ones in there, like Garyon and Doppelganger. Because Garyon, I think, just moved too much for me. I honestly don't remember a lot of the fight. I remember the hallway section, but then beyond that, it's a bit of a blur. I think it became easier after that, but not particularly interesting. And Doppelganger, kind of the same reason, where the first time I did it, I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? But then once I found out, about breaking the lights, it became exceptionally easy, because it was just, hey, Doppelganger, get over here, break a light, then punch up a few times. And then, hey, Doppelganger, get over here, break a light, punch a few times. And then, repeat ad nauseum. And then there are the ones that are actually bad, like Nevin, because that stupid fucking bat surround move, that was just, it's not like it didn't have a clear telegraph, it's just the move itself was a bitch to avoid, and annoying, because half the time you can't even hit Nevin. And at the end, she gives you a shitty stupid weapon. Not to say that the actual weapon is shitty as in it's bad, but that it's got such an interesting learning curve that I don't think it was worth it to try and put like any time into using that thing. Which disappoints me a lot, because it's really cool. An electric guitar that's electric. The jokes write themselves. And then I think a famous one is Arkham, because he just keeps spawning some shrimp at you, and you fucking blow up the shrimp with a rocket launcher, and then you hit him a couple times, and you keep blowing up shrimp, and you're like, okay, this is annoying and stupid and not very fun, but I'll be done with it eventually. And then Virgil shows up, which is supposed to be like the coolest fucking moment in the game. But then Virgil shows up and says, Dante, I'm taking your DT. And and now suddenly, I don't think you can style switch either. So, or use, no, it's not that you couldn't style switch, it's that you couldn't use your style button, because it was used to like call Virgil over to you or something. And so now, you can't DT, and you can't use your style button, so you're just kind of sitting there, whacking Arkham with your buddy Virgil, and he's not really doing all that much, because he's not being controlled by player 2, assuming you aren't playing DMC3 with another person, which I feel like most people weren't. And so, Virgil, he's just kind of sitting there, taking damage, not really doing much to help, and you're doing the best you can without any of your best tools, and it's just not a very good fight. But eventually it ends, and it's got a pretty good cutscene that Virgil does not reciprocate in Devil May Cry 5, which we will get to. And then in terms of like the actual final Virgil fight, I mentioned earlier that I didn't think it was all that good, which is mostly because I think the camera was fucking me up during that entire fight. And because Virgil, he's a little bit unpredictable. He'll use certain moves like from each other or like in certain contexts. If you're far away from him, he's probably going to use Judgment Cut. That's like a given. But the unpredictability was made worse by the fact that if I was waiting for Virgil to do something, my camera ever got too close to the wall, it would just not go in the direction I wanted and fuck me up in terms of either dodging or just trying to avoid whatever Virgil was throwing at me. And it got really irritating really fast, to the point where I would just kind of stick to the middle of the level and hope that it did me well, and that Virgil wouldn't throw like a Judgment Cut that forced me in a certain direction or anything. But I eventually did it, because I am a gamer and I persist. And at the end of the experience, I could definitely say that I liked DMC3. Probably not as much as a lot of other action games, or especially DMC5. And again, DMC3 is another one that people are very passionate about because of how important it is, allegedly. And again, I see it even more so than with 1, because I actually liked 3. But 3 was another one where it's like, yeah, it's alright. I've heard the notion that to really understand a DMC game, you have to play it on DMD. And, I know that there are things that DMC5 doesn't have that the old DMCs did, like the double trigger explosion. But if Dante Must Die is anything in the other games like it is in DMC5, then I will never, ever play DMD in any game but DMC5. And the reason I did it in that game is because I wanted the achievements. I guess I would have done it anyway just to beat them in general, but I wouldn't have gone to S-rank all of them if it weren't for the achievements. Because DMD, I think, is probably one of the worst game modes I've ever, or difficulty modes I've ever played in an action-focused game. Because Son of Sparta does the good thing, where it doesn't just give the enemies higher numbers, it mixes up enemy compositions, and because obviously they know you're replaying the game, they can throw some harder enemies at you earlier. Just fighting the fucking Hellkainas the entire time, or the fucking ants, I forget what they're called. But DMD, it's just the same enemies, but they have more health, and they have super armor, and that just doesn't sound very interesting to me, because it's just, hey, do more damage to them now. You don't have to particularly play any more stylishly than you did before, you just have to do bigger numbers. And you might want to avoid damage more because you'll take more of it, but even then, you still have DT, which heals you, and Sin DT, which will not negate damage. You still take damage in Sin DT, but you're so powerful, you're probably not going to take very much of it. To the point where DMD just feels more like a slog than anything. It's just the same thing I was doing before, but they take more damage. Especially King Cerberus. God bless his DMD health. I swear the health bar just didn't move ever. It was actually just a static number. It was a placebo effect. It's like Sephiroth's first health bar in Cage 1. It's just an invisible value that may or may not be going down. You'll never know. Which, I guess, brings us to almost DMC5, which is DMC4. And I mean that quite literally, because DMC4 was the first DMC game that I really liked, and that's probably because I like Nero a lot. Buster itself is already appealing to me as a mechanic, because in fighting games I like grapplers, and so I like the idea of a move that just kind of forces the other guy to stop being able to play the game. And in a single player game, you don't have to worry about someone not having any fun. You can just fuck up the enemies and bully them and not have to worry about it. And Buster is just like an entertaining move to use. It's got cool animations, it looks powerful. Buster's awesome. And Nero himself is also just a more simple character, because as Dante, like, I still use style switching and weapon switching just to, get style, to give it a little bit of variety, and I would use it with different weapons for different contexts. But for the most part, I would just kind of stick to whatever weapon I liked the most, and whatever style I liked the most, which was usually Swordmaster or Trickster. But with Nero, you don't have nearly as many options, and my philosophy when it comes to game design is that limiting the number of options the player has can actually be helpful for creating a more thorough experience for the player to actually, go through. Because Nero having far less tools made me think far more about what I was actually doing when I was playing the game. Because with Dante, I kind of just go through the motions. I kind of just use attacks throughout my arsenal and try not to repeat the same ones over and over again so I get more style, and try not to die. But with Nero, I was actively thinking about what moves chain together and how, and I was always thinking about, okay, what move can I mix in here, and thinking about where I could sneak in a Buster that would still add to my style ranking. And DMC4 just felt like it was more fluid to control than the other DMCs, which may or may not be true, because things like, the jump arcs, which is a staple in the games by now, where you just can't really change your jump arc after you've already done it. DMC4 felt a little bit looser with that, and so I felt far more comfortable actually trying to use different moves in DMC4, because I felt more confident that they would actually come out. And lo and behold, they did. Not to say that they wouldn't do that in 3, but just that 3 felt a certain way. I won't say stiff, because that's a very negative connotation. But 3 very much felt a certain way, where I didn't feel like I was getting a lot of my moves a lot of the time. Before was obviously very different. Really the only problem I can say with 4 is that it has a few obnoxious enemies. Not too many of them, but, they exist. Though I suppose at this point, and considering what I'm going to say about 5, they kind of all have obnoxious enemies, so I guess I can't really count that against 4, at least not compared to the other games. And the thing that everyone complains about, which is the backtracking as Dante. And now, I'm not saying that the backtracking is necessarily a bad thing. If anything, if you're going to make the player backtrack at all, it's best to do it with different characters. That's not literally backtracking. It's just playing a few levels in reverse. The problem really comes from the fact that Dante's missions just suck. They either have bad objectives, or send you to fight a bunch of stupid-ass enemies that suck. Like those ground mine guys that send you to the Netherrealm whenever they grab you. Just not fun in any context or situation. And they would fucking plop those goddamn assholes around even outside of combat, which is like, why? Are you just trying to waste my time? Or did you think this was actually engaging? Because I promise you it's not. And so, here we are. It's also not fun that Dante's weapons kind of suck in 4. Because Lucifer is Lucifer. I don't think I need to explain that one to anyone who knows what Lucifer is all about. And Gilgamesh is another punching weapon, which I would say is not a bad thing, because even just being a punching weapon at all means that at a baseline it can't be that bad, which is true. Gilgamesh was not that bad. But Gilgamesh also just has a bunch of moves that I don't really want to use, and a charge system that I don't really want to use, and so I ended up just kind of punching and kicking the whole time, which, granted, did a fair bit of damage compared to, Rebellion, and obviously compared to Lucifer, which was never, but it just wasn't very fun to use Gilgamesh. And then even something that's interesting like Pandora, very, very unique concept for a gun, and I liked it a lot. But fuck me, I'm never going to use any of these configurations. There's just never any chance where I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I need configuration 296. It just doesn't happen. It's I want to shoot the guy, not I want to input some fighting game combos and then potentially shoot the guy while also taking damage, because this isn't invincible despite how much work it goes into actually doing it. Like, I don't like V in DMC5, but Griffin is a far better combo projectile, or projectile with like moves, than Pandora ever was. So clearly they must have learned something, hopefully. And in terms of the story, it's whatever. I'm never particularly enthralled by a DMC story. I am by 5s, but that's for a very different reason that we'll get to, hopefully, within the next half an hour. So with 4s, I just kind of let it play out. Didn't really care all that much about the specifics. But something that was interesting to me was I was looking around at like forums and stuff about DMC4, either about gameplay things and whatever it might be, and I got curious and I wondered, what did people think about Nero before, DMC5 was a thing? Because in DMC4, they never really mentioned Virgil. Obviously, I played Special Edition, where Virgil's at the beginning of the game, and you can play as him. But in the original game, it started off normally. Virgil wasn't in the intro cutscene. And then Nero's like a guy who looks just like Dante, and obviously is a son of Sparta. And so you would assume, oh, he's Dante's kid. But, even without knowledge that Nero was Virgil's kid, I think I would have assumed that Nero was Virgil's kid, because of a few things that Dante says, or a few things that happen. For one, at the end of the game, Dante's like, oh yeah, you should keep the Yamato. I think you should stay in the family. And it's like, if Nero was his kid, don't you think Dante would not be a deadbeat dad and just be like, alright, I'm sticking around, kid? Or at least try to be more of a pal to Nero, as opposed to like, yeah, keep that sword. It was your uncle's, and you're my kid, but fuck you, bye. Like, Nero doesn't even know what his lineage is until DMC5. He just assumed that Dante's like some guy who also has white hair for some reason. Does Nero even know he's part devil? Because like obviously, the devil no, not devil buster, bringer, the devil bringer. It's too many B words. There's bringer, there's buster, there's breaker. But obviously devil bringer is not a normal hand unless he's been jacking off too much. But like, would he have assumed that he was a demon from Devilbringer, or would he just have assumed that he got like possessed or something? Because like, I don't know exactly the lore behind how demons work in the DMC universe, but if my hand was just suddenly one day a jack-off hand that was glowing and shit in reaction to demons, I wouldn't assume that I was a demon. I would assume that someone did something to me. Especially in the fucked up weirdo cult that Nero's in. I don't know how openly Agnes was running his experiments, but still. And so I'm not even sure if Nero knew he was a demon for any of DMC4 and some of DMC5. Point being, Dante's very standoffish to a kid who knows basically nothing about this whole world of Sons of Sparta and whatnot, for him to be his dad. And then also, he uses the fucking Yamato. Like, that's very obviously him taking on Virgil's mantle, right? Like, you could argue that if it was Dante's kid, then it's just, oh, someone else to use one of the swords of Sparta. It doesn't have to be a descendant of Virgil specifically. But like, doesn't it? Sparta made the Yamato for Virgil. And so I would assume that if we really wanted a guy to use it, it would be his son. And again, I understand that it's not necessarily exclusive to Virgil, because Dante also uses the Yamato. And so he could theoretically pass it down to his own son, and then he could use it. But I just feel like it's far more clear that they were going for Nero as Virgil's kid. He uses the Yamato, he doesn't have a full Devil Trigger, but his Devil Trigger spirit looks like Virgil's DT. His primary color is blue. Like, I guess he technically wears red under his hoodie, but, I mean, come on. The hoodie is blue. and the DT soul is blue. I feel like we're kind of going for a Virgil thing here, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased because I have the future, or because when I played it, I had the future knowledge that, yeah, I know Nero was Virgil's kid. And so maybe it was just really obvious to me having already known that, and back in the day, Virgil was like the guy who was from DMC3, because again, until Special Edition, people didn't really know Virgil had anything to do with DMC4. And so it was like, oh yeah, Virgil, that one guy from DMC3, and also technically DMC1. Why would they assume that he's Nero's dad when they seemingly went out of their way to make Virgil look like Dante, and to an extent act like Dante, and constantly interact with Dante, and Dante does not mention Virgil at all, and just kind of takes the Yamato and invents a new style for it. I understand how someone would come to the conclusion that Nero is actually Dante's kid. I just feel like there's also a lot of evidence that points to Virgil's kid, but having a look around the forums that I was perusing when I got curious, it seemed like the general consensus was that, yeah, he was Dante's kid. I don't even remember seeing a post that was like, well, what about Virgil? I think everyone just assumed that it couldn't have been Virgil, which is weird, right? Like, obviously it could have been Virgil. But he has a penis, he fucks, evidently. But I guess that finally brings us to DMC5, which is the best one. I don't think it's a very controversial statement. Well, I mean, to some people it is. I know there are some people who consider DMC1 to be their favorite, which, God bless their hearts, you know? I hope they find peace one day. But yeah, DMC5, pretty cold take. It is the best one. It controls the best. It has the best camera, almost. I'll get to that. It has the best story, kind of. I'll get to that. And yeah, no, that's kind of it. It controls the best. And for an action game, can you really ask for much more? I think the only thing that kind of annoys me about the controls aspect of DMC5 is that I don't like that Nero just doesn't have a DT for the entire game. I know that it's supposed to be the end game reward. You go back to other things and then you have DT with Nero. But, like, the whole game, it's just sword, gun, breaker, and you don't even have all the breakers from the start. It's very limiting. And then, this isn't really controls, but I guess to stay on topic of breakers, I also don't like that you have to buy multiple breakers and have, like, an actual supply of them. And, like, granted, once you've played the game for long enough, you'll just have, like, the hundreds of each, and you'll never need to worry about really having to restock any of them. But it got to the point where I was wondering if it was worth it to spend my red orbs on, like, a lot of the higher-end breakers, and not just buy a bunch of Gerbras and Overtures, because they would be the most consistent in terms of damage, and I wouldn't have to worry about breaking them from doing something I wasn't used to. It's just, hey, you press a button and it does a thing. If anything, you don't have to worry about getting hit while you're using Gerbera, because it'll actually not automatically, but the hitbox is so big it'll counter things when you use it. And I guess V might also count as a control issue now that I think about it, but it's less of controls and more of I just don't like how V plays. His whole Puppet Master situation is not very fun. I don't like it, because a lot of the combos and like actual in-depth gameplay from DMC5 comes from a lot of the up-close and in-your-face gameplay. Again, the guns are not for killing; they're for augmenting your combos and whatnot. And then you get to V, and it's like, oh yeah, you spend the entire game just kind of spamming with these two guys that you can't directly control, and they might move to places that you don't want them to. Because, God bless, I cannot think of how many times I've had Griffin and Shadow just move in a direction I did not want them to. Or, if I had Griffin and Shadow attacking someone, and I want them to just keep attacking that person, or that enemy, but then they end their combo, and they teleport back to V, just to go back to the person I want them to attack. Why didn't you just stay over there? If I wanted you to come back to me, I'd use the dodge moves. So I guess that does kind of count as controls, because there's no way to control which way these motherfuckers move. You can control when they attack, but the way they move before they do that is kind of do their own thing, which is kind of shit. They might walk up to whoever you're locked onto, but again, that doesn't really help when it's something as simple as, hey, can you not teleport back to me and just stay on the person I asked you to? So, not a universal solution. Dante is pretty much the same as always. It's nice that they bring back King Cerberus in a slightly different, or Cerberus in a slightly different form, because it's like, oh, you know, you get your classic stuff, as in punch or the sword attacks, punching attacks, with Balrog being just the best one. Because Beowulf is fun, but it's very straightforward and simple. It's punches and kicks. Whoa. It's punches and kicks. and then we've already talked about Gilgamesh. But Balrog is the stance switching is definitely a cool idea. I feel like it could have been done a little bit smoother, but I also don't know how I would do that any smoother, so I suppose who am I to talk? And then Cerberus is back, so that's 3 weapons that you kind of already know how to use, just given how the games have worked. And then in terms of like the exclusively new weapon, Cavalier, it's just a really fun idea, especially since they were definitely, I don't know if I can say definitely, but they were teasing the idea of Dante using a bike as a weapon in DMC3, and he even cuts it in half in that game too, which is why it astounds me that it took them until 5 to actually do it. But yeah, just Dante using a bike to attack people, it's fucking awesome. There's not much more to say about it. Even the new gun, Dr. Faust, is just a really good gun. I wouldn't say it's particularly inspired. It's like, oh yeah, it's a gun, but it's strong and it uses red orbs. It's got a few unique attacks. Like, yeah, I mean, fair. It's not. I'm not trying to say it's like worthless or just completely derivative or anything. It's just very straightforward, because I really only use Dr. Faust for 2 things. Shooting to do a lot of damage, or Red Hot Knight. Or Red Orb grinding. Which is ironic, considering that's what it spends, but, you know. And so from a gameplay perspective, I don't really have a lot of complaints about DMC5. It's pretty good, except for, oh my god, that fucking camera. So DMC4 had an option where you could set how the camera lock-on worked. You could set that it was either the most prominent enemy that's currently on screen is what it would lock onto, or it would lock onto the enemy that's closest to whatever direction you're pointing the left stick. And I prefer the left stick version, because there were times where I would want to lock onto an enemy so I could use certain moves, but I would want to turn the camera around, just, you know, either behind me or to the sides, so I could see what was going on around me. Or it would even just end up being that way, because the camera wouldn't automatically swing behind me just because I locked on. And so, I liked the left stick version, and not so much the on-screen version. But it doesn't matter, because even the on-screen version would have been better than what's in DMC5, because at least the on-screen version is consistent. If there's an enemy that's on-screen, you can, with reasonable assumption, be able to figure out which one's going to lock onto. With DMC5, it's a fucking crapshoot. Like, I don't have any notes about where specifically I'm going to end up putting footage for this video, because like I said, it's probably going to be a lot of non-specific footage, and whenever I cut down the audio to save on time, it's probably not going to end up in the same place anyway. But I hope that whenever I'm editing this, I get that fucking clip of me fighting Gilgamesh in DMC5, where the camera is locked on to something that's off screen, to the point where I tried to use Nero's Payline on Gilgamesh's big red orb spot, and then it locked onto one of his big long tentacles, and I didn't even notice because that shit was off screen, and obviously why would it lock onto that? But it was when I wasn't even pointing at it. I wasn't pointing the left stick at it, it wasn't on screen. Why and how did it lock onto something that wasn't even like feasibly within my purview? How does that work? And it's not like so constant a problem that it like ruins the game or anything, but every time it does happen, it's extremely noticeable. And when you go to the settings and notice that there suspiciously isn't any setting to change how the lock-on works, it feels like they thought they had something that I might just not understand, because it's weird when it happens. It's so obvious. Though speaking of the camera, what the hell is up with the Hell Judicas? The guys with the big long scythe hands that summon other enemies. I've gotten attacked from off-screen by those motherfuckers more times than I can even count. And I have at least bare minimum 3 clips of it happening. Again, I don't know when this is going to end up in the time code, but I hope that when I'm listening back to this, I go, oh yeah, the thing, and then I go to my fucking PC clips and just plop that shit down, because it's insane to me how often it happens. And it's usually the stab attack. Not the one where they teleport to you and then stab. No, it's like they extend their arms out and stab. And it's like, how? Because DMC5, if you don't know, has a rule where enemies will not attack you if they're off screen. For obvious reasons, like, duh, that'd be fucking stupid if they did. Or, it would be unfair if they did, I should say. But Judicas, more often, just never have any respect for this rule. They will either do their extendo arm attack from off screen and just hit you for no good reason, or they'll do one of their teleport to you attacks, which technically does not count as them attacking you from off screen, but they can only initiate the teleport to you attack as a teleport to attack, because they have their normal teleport where they just go to a place first and then don't do anything when they come out of the portal. So if a portal spawns next to me, and that means it already knew it was going to attack, and I don't understand how it's fair that the Judica can already know it's going to attack when the one thing the game asks of the enemy is that they don't attack from off screen, that they don't initiate an attack from off screen. If they initiate it and then they go off screen, then it's too late. But it's to the point where Judicas are probably the most irritating enemy to me, if any, in the game. And I know that Furies are another popular one for like the most hated enemy in DMC5, but Furies are not insane. They're pretty easy to deal with Dante because of Revolver, and honestly, they just changed Revolver to free parry move because that's what it's called at this point to me. And it's harder with Nero because he doesn't have a lot of multi-hit attacks, and all of his actual normal sword swings are very, very slow. Well, not very slow, but they're definitely delayed. So I understand why people would say that Furies are the worst, but having played all of the difficulties of DMC5 a few multiple times, because Hell in Hell is, well, I mean, it's hell. I can't think of any situation with a Fury where it was so overwhelming that I just didn't really have any way to deal with it. The most prominent example I can think of is in Mission 8, because they spawn a Fury like basically at the very beginning. But I know that it's not exactly fair to ask the player to know these things are coming ahead of time, but if you choose to redo the mission and then go in with a, not Tomboy, whatever the stopping time Devil Breaker is, going with that one, you can just kill the Fury in one break age. You might not even need all that. You might just be able to do a lot of damage to it with an initial hit, and then Buster DT, and then it'll be dead. I can't think of many situations where you're actually forced to fight a Fury as Nero, and it's actually any, like, big deal. And I don't think you ever fight a Fury as V, which I would fucking hope not. That sounds impossible, but at the very least not very fun. So, and I guess the last thing I ever want to talk about is the story of DMC5, which, having read the manga for DMC5, which definitely gives some, I would call it necessary backstory for DMC5 to function as a plot, it's definitely a strange one, because it definitely feels like DMC5 was either the bones of a plot that didn't get finished, or was intended to be wrapped up by a bunch of other ancillary material that I either haven't read or doesn't exist. Like, for example, why did Virgil come back in DMC5? And I don't mean from a meta perspective of because he's cool and people like him. I mean, like, what was the plan? Because he split himself off into demon and human halves so that he'd be pure demon, and that would make him stronger, which I guess is true, because he became Urizen, and then Dante couldn't even fucking touch him. And so he becomes the demon and human halves, and it's like, okay, but now V, his human side, is like, well, I want to live because I'm a human, and I have wants and desires like anyone else, and I don't want to die as a pile of dust like anyone else. But to be able to refuse myself, I'll need to get back to my body, which is going to be fucking impossible because he'll annihilate me in a second if I get close. So I need Dante to help me do it. And then Dante goes to do it, and he fucks up. But V, the genius that he is, secures his backup plan, which is Nero, who sucks even more, and also is down an arm. So after seeing the both of them get fucked up, he's like, alright, I guess I'll just have to wait for Nero to get strong, and hopefully he can actually do it this time. Which, spoiler V, he does not. He fights Cherizen, and then almost gets a scratch in before he immediately gets fucked up again. So, good job V. If Dante wasn't still alive, he would have been fucked. But then, as they get closer to Urizen, what was V's plan? Because Dante got there first, and Dante was just gonna fucking kill him, because, So what was V's plan if he didn't get there in time? Oh well, I guess I'll die? Like, fair enough, he didn't have many other options, but I feel like he would have had a little bit more forward thinking than that. But then, even when he got there, what was his plan? Because what he ends up doing is stabbing himself, or, well, stabbing Urizen, and then that ends up fusing the two of them back into Virgil. But how did he know that was gonna happen? Because as far as V knows, both from in the game and in the manga, all the Cane does is allow him to kill off demons, because his familiars can't do it themselves. So what was really the thought process behind everything, really? When he got to Urizen, did he know that fucking stabbing him with the cane was gonna make them fuse together? How did he know that wasn't just gonna kill him? The only example I can possibly think of is that he did think it was going to kill him, and he was just like, you know, the humanity side of Virgil was like, I've done too many bad things to let myself live, I just gotta kill myself now. And then he accidentally fused the two of them back together. But I don't think that's the case either, because Dante somehow seemed to know what was happening when V was about to stab him with a cane. Because again, the only thing Dante knows about this man is that he sometimes kills demons, I guess, and has familiars. So why did Dante know that when V was gonna stab Urizen with the cane, that was gonna fuse them back into Virgil, and that it wasn't just gonna kill him? And then even when Virgil comes back, why is Dante just like straight into kill mode? Virgil's whole plan was to use the Qliphoth to get the poisoned apple, to have his demon form eat it, and then become even stronger. And as a consequence, when he fused back into his Virgil form, he was still, he got to keep the strength of the poisoned apple. Which is like, you know, fair enough, I guess. But after eating the apple, that was kind of it. Like, his plan was done. Like, yeah, the Qliphoth's bad because it eats people and all that, but they can cut it down now. Virgil got what he wanted. He just wanted the power. He also wants to fight Dante for revenge, I guess. It's kind of hard to tell at this point. Virgil's motivations are to be strong so that he never has to, like, feel the weakness he felt as a kid ever again. But I think he's a bit beyond that point now, so who knows why he still does it. Maybe it's just for the love of the game. You can never know with this man. But then they eventually fight, I guess, planning on killing each other, until Nero's like, wait, what if you just didn't do that? And then they're like, huh, yeah, alright. And they go to hell to cut down the Qliphoth, and I guess just live down there for the foreseeable future. Well, I say the foreseeable future, but with Itsuno leaving Capcom, it might just be the forever. But I don't know, maybe they'll make DMC6 with someone else, and it'll be the DMC2 of DMC5. That'll be fun. And yeah, there's just a lot of things that I feel like I don't understand about DMC5's story that I don't want to call bad, because it feels like I'm just missing something. Like there was some piece of content, or some cutscene I didn't understand, where it explains any of this. But having read the manga, which was supposed to serve as like the companion piece DMC5 next to the novel, which also didn't explain much, even despite the fact that it's about V and Virgil, it didn't help a lot. So I feel like there might just be a lot of spots in DMC5's plot where the answer is who gives a shit, because they didn't think about it. But, you know, as a whole, DMC5, or the whole DMC series, honestly, like I said, I was never really that enthralled by the plots. It's always just kind of there to facilitate the cool moments and the very funny cutscenes in DMC3. But I'm glad that I caught up to all of these series, honestly. Well, I say caught up, but things like Rhythm Heaven and Arkham and The Road Ends With You, and I guess DMC. So I guess all the games that I talked about today, they might not ever be getting sequels. Well, two of them definitely not. Or, sorry, no. One of them definitely not. Two of them probably not. And DMC is, you know, maybe. Oh, you know, I just realized I never talked about DMCDMC. It's got a stupid plot that's stupid and bad and I hate it. The gameplay was actually kind of fine, just not really DMC gameplay. It's just kind of a generic action game. And I understand why people hate it, but I don't. But like the most embarrassing game of all time, I don't know. I like playing it more than I did DMC1, so take that for what you will. But yeah, that's DMC and Rhythm Heaven, and what else did I talk about? The Worlds With You, and the Arkham games. And so, like I said, I'm gonna have to end up splitting this into two parts apparently, because we're 2 hours in, and I only talked about 4 series. I still got 3 more to go, plus the gaming topic, which I will save for next time, so we can sort of even it out with 4 topics each for the episode. When I'll do part 2, hopefully within the next few days from when I upload this, but I can't guarantee that, because I have no idea how much free time I'll actually have to record a 2-hour session, you know, with minimal interruptions. But hopefully I don't have the 2 parts be an entire week from each other, so I can get to the other parts that I need to do before I start doing this series, like, legit the way that I planned it. But, you know, I'll do whatever I need to do, so I guess you'll see when it comes out. But for now, this is your introduction to the Backlog Bunker. I'm probably going to get art for this series eventually, hopefully. I want to see what the viewership is like first, if it gets any, and then I'll see about getting art for it. But I definitely plan on doing this for a long time. I play a lot of video games, and I play them often, so I think a weekly series about my thoughts about whatever games I played is definitely something that will be interesting, because I have a lot of thoughts about the things that I play. I have like 300 games logged on Backlogged, and I have a review for like half of them, and most of those reviews are just like the SparkNotes versions of my actual thoughts. I could definitely say way more about every single one if I wanted to. So yeah, this is a vector for me to talk about video games that I guess I don't really get on my streams all that often, because they usually don't come up. Or you could consider this a solo podcast, because I tried to do that once, and I think we all just want different things from the podcast. But, you know, now I'm here doing this with my covers draped over my PC to minimize the amount of noise echo that ruins the audio and makes it worse for all you to listen to. Yeah, that's about it. Stop listening now. I'm done. I've been done for like the last 2 minutes. This has been me rambling, so I can evenly end it at 2 hours. Not that it'll matter anyway. Like I said, I have to cut out all the silences and clicks and uhs and ums and mouth smacks, which are awful sound that humans make. Why does that happen? It's just so often. It's a whole thing. But yeah, thanks for listening. If you listened all the way, I appreciate your view, and I appreciate you listening to the things that I have to say, because not everyone has to do that. No one has to do that, honestly. You could have just not listened to me, and you would have been just as fine, if not better, if you like DMC1 and you don't like me shitting on that game. Sorry about that, by the way. I just didn't really like it all that much. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can convince me. If I leave a comment about it or something, give me some engagement. Why not, right? But anyway, that's it.